Welcome to the Building Sustainably Podcast by RPS. Sustainable, resilient development demands a new approach to how we plan, design, and build. We invite you to join us as we explore real-life case studies and offer practical guidance. Here's your hosts, Ben, Emily, and James.
We talked about Birmingham a little bit, but you operate across, across the whole of the UK. And so, do you see that value of engaging with the local population, the local workforce, as being a key part of your sort of successful delivery of your projects?
Yeah, absolutely. As an architect, it's not my area of expertise, but we have a lot of good examples of what we're doing. So in Hove, we've got an art installation, a massive mural that's being produced out there using local artists. We've got collaborations with institutions like Glasgow School of Arts. We're working with, and we hope to further work with, charities in Birmingham on our Stoneyard project. I think it's really important because motor projects or motor neighbourhoods, they're not dropped into a city and they're not islands or compounds. They're deep rooted in that local area and the local context. We employ from the local area. We need people to work within our buildings that know the area. They know all the good places to go. They can speak to our residents and tell them about a good restaurant around the corner. They're deeply embedded in it. So, it works with the business strategy as well. So yeah, it's incredibly important.
Just moving on from that then. So in terms of comparing yourself against peers and alternative developers, what sort of benchmarks or accreditations are Modo working towards on their projects? Because you want to be able to demonstrate the good work that you're doing on your development. So what sort of accreditations are you focusing on?
Carbon aside, we use certifications to demonstrate the performance of our schemes. We're already doing quite a lot. It's difficult without certification to demonstrate that and for it to be legible and transparent. So we use on our PBSA, our students part of that same BRE family. That's focusing more on sustainability aspects. We also use Fitwell, which has a bit more of a health and wellbeing focus, and it works quite well in terms of operations. So it assesses, you have to redo it over 3 years, and it assesses how we're operating our buildings. So we target 3-star with Fitwell as well. We're fortunate because of how we've been pioneering Fitwell in this country, it's a US certification. Because of all the hard work we've been doing it and the successes we've had across our projects, we've been invited to what they call the Fitwell champion status as well. This is within the last year. We use those certifications to demonstrate our performance in ESG.
The next point I wanted just to cover was, you touched on it earlier, but in terms of, you're in the unique opportunity as being the operator that you have access to the people that ultimately occupy your buildings and your residents. So again, you can capture that data, and you talked about how you're capturing that data with residents, feeding that back into designs. But does that engagement with your residents impact or influence your ESG strategy?
Yes, it does. Yeah. So we're routinely pushing out surveys. We don't want to give the residents survey fatigue. You don't want to be doing too many, but we do push out surveys to understand what the priorities are for our residents. So some of the metrics we've heard is 90% of residents say that their living environment impacts their well-being. Absolutely true. So what we've been trying to design into our buildings, well, it's just good architecture, really. So it's, good levels of light, biophilia within the spaces, so views of natural spaces, external foliage, trees, green spaces, all helps mental health and well-being. We've had 70% value the community and 77% are willing to pay a premium for higher quality amenities. The amenities that we put in our spaces are absolutely amazing. So they could be private dining rooms on upper levels that have got city views, be lounge spaces with them, cinema rooms. We have, particularly following COVID and working from home, we put in really generous co-working spaces now. So this is like the equivalent of going into your grade A office scheme. We have those spaces within our buildings now. So a resident doesn't have to work from home in their apartment. They can have that clean separation between where they want to live and where they want to work. So They can go downstairs, they can go to the co-working space. They can even leave their laptop, leave their monitors down there, the keyboards, and they can take up their space and work alongside the wider community. And some of our residents even run businesses out of our buildings.
So, touching on pre-application and thinking about the life cycle of projects, can you share your views on what are some of the best practices or strategies if you're taking a project from its conception? What are some things that people leading projects should be thinking about from those very early days throughout? What's good look like?
So our advice since biodiversity net gain became a thing is that it's really important to start early. You really need to think about the ecological baseline and measurement very early on to get an idea of what the requirements will be. And I think it's also really important that the ecologists, the landscape architects, and the hydrologists looking at surface water and the surface water management all work together. Those sort of integrated designs are much more functional, much more pleasing to the eye, and deliver all of the sort of integrated outputs in a much more synergistic way. So you can make the space on developments work a lot harder for you, so you get more bang for your buck, as it were. And I think it's really important to really design with a view to what's in the biodiversity net gain metric. So my advice to clients is for that design process to always have their metric in your back pocket, metaphorically, so that you know what the baseline is, you know what you've got to hit in terms of the 10% uplift. And if you start with that on the front foot, then you're much more likely to get there in the end. It's really hard to retrofit BNG into a design where it's not been considered.
Right.
Yeah.
And as far as engaging with the people side of a project and the stakeholder engagement, how important are conversations early with the planning department of the local authority, with neighbours, with potential, I guess, residents or occupants of a structure? Where do they come in?
Well, I think it's really important for a project in any case, but I think certainly my experience on sites where there is some existing ecological interest or concerns, it's really important to take the local authority with you on the design process so that they can see how the design is evolving to consider the constraints and opportunities for the site. And really in the consultation with other stakeholders, the public, the community, it's really important that you can demonstrate that that process has taken place and that the design reflects the site. It's not just being plonked on as a standard design. And there are references to the local context in terms of ecology and other aspects.
Yeah, okay. That makes a lot of sense. Thinking about getting these things off the ground, no pun intended, are there any incentives or grants in the industry right now that will support including that, or is it really left to the project to find the funding and meet the BNG requirement?
It really is built into the projects now. So it's a requirement. And so developers need to find a way to be able to finance both the surveys and the assessment and valuation, but also the design and the delivery. And some of that can be quite expensive. It depends on the project type and the local context. Green roofs are not necessarily cheap, especially if you buy them off the shelf and you want, especially if you want a particularly biodiverse one or you want something that's a little bit specialist, then you can actually find that the costs for those are really quite large and they're a real consideration in terms of the overall build. So again, it's really important to have an understanding of that early on so it can be built in. But there are some opportunities as well. And certainly, been engaged a number of times now in London in particular, where the assessment and the need for biodiversity net gain is pretty much nil because it's a complete hard standing and existing building. So there's no need for uplift, but there is space for a green roof. And so there's a real opportunity there to generate extra biodiversity net gain units for a site which are in excess of the requirement for that particular development. So clients who have a portfolio of projects coming forwards, they can bank those to use for their other projects. And that saves them time and money and heartache and risk in terms of other projects where you might struggle to find off-site opportunities. If you can't deliver them on site, you may need to buy biodiversity units, and that market is a free market in the moment, and it's very much led by demand, and so the prices can vary quite a lot. So being able to generate your own biodiversity units as a client is really a real positive, actually.
If you take a section of concrete that by weight, the main ingredients are aggregates and sand and water, but the material that binds it all together and makes it hard is called cement. And it's the cement that's responsible for probably 80 to 90% of the embodied carbon footprint in a section of concrete. And the reason why cement has such a high footprint is because it's very energy intensive. So to make cement in this part of the world, you take limestone, you heat it to 1400 degrees centigrade, and that takes a lot of energy. So it's very energy intensive. So you can think of the emissions from, traditionally that's been fossil fuel based energy.
Sure.
Plus, when the limestone breaks down, there's what they call process emissions. So that's actually release of carbon dioxide from the chemical.
Because it's limestone, is calcium carbonate?
This is it. So you've got a lot of CO2 coming out the stack, coming out the end point of the cement kilns. That's where the pain is felt in terms of carbon footprint. And that's really the big challenge. So the cement companies themselves, they've switched to alternative fuels. They've used a lot of energy efficiency. They're beginning to use renewable energy where they can. But there's still the process emissions, which is about 2/3 of the carbon emissions from cement production. That's a big challenge for that sector.
Yeah.
So that's the origin of the big footprint of concrete. It's in the cement.
Yeah, and that's an interesting clarification, I think, for many. The layman may not appreciate that concrete and cement are two different things. Concrete is the finished product, cement being, as you say, the binder that holds it all together. But the two are not interchangeable in the sense of what they actually are. Thanks for that clarity. So that brings us to, we've got to solve the cement challenge in concrete. And is there, I'm just trying to think here, where are the innovations coming from? What are we seeing? Is there anything clever that's going to save the day, or is it down to a reduction in just general application?
I suppose the tried and trusted way to reduce carbon in concrete up to now, and it's been for several decades, it's gone back probably over the last century, has been to replace some of the cement, some of the high energy material with other products. And the two main ones that have been used, they're byproducts of iron ore smelting. So you have something called blast furnace slag, which is a byproduct from iron ore smelting, and that can be ground down. So it's called GGBS, ground granulated blast furnace slag, which has very good cementitious qualities. So at the moment, across the UK and Ireland, if you ask for low carbon concrete, you'll get a combination of Portland cement, traditional cement, and GGBS. That's one of the go-to products at the moment. The other go-to product for low carbon concrete is what they call PFA, so pulverized fly ash. And that is a residue from coal-fired energy production, so coal-fired power plants. Okay. So it's readily available. It's like a circular economy solution. And that also, you can mix some of that in with your concrete and reduce the amount of cement used. So those techniques are tried and trusted. They result in very durable concrete products. The difficulty with those techniques and those solutions is they rely on maybe unsustainable industries themselves.
obviously from an engineer's perspective as well. What are the key carbon contributors that you have been seeing within industrial buildings or within industrial and logistics as well, that go towards this?
So we've looked at a number of different types of logistics facilities, and obviously, as we know now, in industrial and logistics, there's all shapes and sizes of types of buildings, and they have become quite complex. So, as Rachel's mentioned, using sort of RICS guidance, assessed a typical UK developer-based build specifications. So, a typical 18-metre clear height facility with the usual external yards. So, by taking that 60-year reference study period and looking at the modules that Rachel's discussed, a typical breakdown for an industrial facility, we're seeing, carbon footprints of around about sort of 750 kilograms of CO2 per square metre. So that's assuming a 60-year reference study period. And typically, 55% of that figure is associated with the upfront embodied carbon, so module A, and just over 45% is associated with in-use or operational carbon. So both upfront and operational in-use are big contributors when considering a 60-year reference study period. If we look at the embodied carbon upfront, so module A, it's, I guess, no surprise that concrete is the biggest contributor to that. If you think for industrial logistics, there's a vast amount of concrete associated with what can be fairly thick ground floor concrete floors. There's the external yards, and then there's obviously the concrete associated with foundations and upper floors, particularly if there's mezzanine floors. So concrete contributes about 30% of the upfront embodied carbon in module A. So really the focus has to be on looking at how we either reduce and or specify lower carbon concretes if we're to make any impact on industrial and logistics facilities. So that's the first key thing. The steel frame typically accounts for around about 20%. So again, looking at how we can reduce steel in terms of its material quantities, or look at different ways of manufacturing. We know most of steel that we get at the moment is through the basic oxygen furnace process. And if we looked at electric arc furnace processes, for example, that would play a significant reduction in the carbon footprint of steel. So I think steel and concrete will still have a big part to play in industrial and logistics facilities. It's how we reduce the use and make their embodied carbon less in moving forwards. So the modular approach that Rachel's talked about is really important in identifying hotspots within the buildings and how we can target and reduce and prioritise what materials we look at. So I've talked about the concrete and steel. I guess it's no surprise that the cladding systems, so the walls and the roof, curtain walls, etc., they contribute around about 16%. So the three key things, concrete, steel and cladding, which are all things we know we can look at and start to look at alternative materials.
It's worth mentioning with the collaboration and the materials kind of aspect, what one discipline does, another discipline has to account for. So you have to talk an awful lot with each other when you're making changes. Sustainable design will, in some respects, only take you so far. A lot of it, as John said, is tied up with the big carbon hitters, concrete and steel. And we are, of course, at mercy on the availability of those materials. So unless our industry actually makes some significant changes to how they produce these materials, you are not going to get a lower embodied carbon figure.
Yeah, it's a good point, Rach. I think we need to consider where we get our materials from. because obviously transportation plays a huge part in terms of carbon footprint. So we've talked about steel and concrete. You and I have discussed glulam before and how this might like steel. I think it's an option to look at, but we know, as you've mentioned, that there's no local UK mass production of glulam which could serve the logistics industry. So there are examples of industrial buildings with glulam, but they're supplied generally by Nordic or Austrian companies. So we need to consider, the impact of how those materials are manufactured and transported to the UK, as well as obviously their upfront embodied carbon.
We've discussed the best approaches and obviously your takeaways from what's been going on with previous projects or case law that has emerged. And I suppose staying informed about evolving case law and policy updates along with the NPPF framework coming into it and the update that's going to come through for it. Would there be any other sort of top highlights that we may have already discussed and sort of gone into detail, but as the maybe top view that as before you go into the sequential test, what would be the hard-hitting points that you would do beforehand?
Make sure there's a collaboration going on and that you're not losing or deferring the preparation of the test between different disciplines. Getting the definition of the project right so that everybody agrees what it is and what, as Jonathan said about grid connections, or maybe you've got a medical centre or something that's unique or potentially unique that defines your project and that defines the search area. Agree that search area. And then it becomes kind of a two-part assessment. From our point of view as flood risk engineers, we would look at comparing that site to all of the other potential alternatives. And then you might end up with a big long list of 200 sites or whatever, and you come, 12th in that big long list. And then, as we said earlier about, is it reasonable to include all of that 200? And then you look at maybe the size doesn't work, in which case your list then goes down to 50, perhaps. And then you look at other things such as your uniqueness, and then that might rule out a few others. And then it's really over to the planners and the clients to then look at what sites remain and then do the assessment of what's available, what's reasonably available, and then that gets you down to that really short list of the sequentially preferable or not sites. So as long as it's done rigorously and in the methodology of the sequential test with case law behind it, then that's where you really need to go.
I would say I would be mindful of the sequential test at the due diligence stage. If you're looking at a new site, be mindful that if you are looking at a site, that this may need to be applied, and an awareness that you don't want to get down the track and find that you still need to apply this. And at that point, when you've invested a significant amount of funds into developing a concept for the site, a layout and everything else, that you need to undertake the sequential test. And at that point, you establish that there is, in fact, a reasonably available site and you could effectively be challenged upon it. So that initial awareness, I would say, as part of this podcast, we're aware that the sequential test is becoming more of a hot topic. Then the scrutiny being applied to it is at the forefront. So for any developers moving forward with a site, as I say, an awareness that this test may be required and having that ready is, I think, the best advice I could put forward.
I think the key take home is, wind farms and birds is all about location, location, location. There are risks, but we can work with those risks through mitigation and careful planning. We need to increase our understanding, but when we do collect data, we need to then use that data. Data shouldn't just be collected and put on a shelf and left in a corner. We need to use it and understand it and have a calm, rational, pragmatic approach. And all parties need to work together, developers and regulators. We're all aware that the regulators have been squeezed and it's a lot of pressure on them. But if we are to fight climate change, and we've seen recently some real sort of negative impacts in Spain from climate change, we see gradual creep in climate change, as I say, through egrets and warmer species moving north in the UK. So there's continual change. There's no such thing as a set baseline. But yeah, we need to take a pragmatic approach and try and develop in harmony without being too much of a pun. But yeah, that's what we need to do. We need to, move forward sensibly on that.
Yeah, and if onshore and offshore wind is going to be a key part of our energy strategy moving forward, which it is, then it's important that we do strike that balance between that need and that development, and obviously keeping the whole of the natural world, but in particular birds, protected, and having that developing stream of data are available to us. As long as we analyse it correctly, that's invaluable in making sure that we can continue to move forward in the sector.
Where would you recommend starting if you are either in a corporate role charged with drafting an ESG strategy, or potentially career-wise looking to make a transition into ESG? Some suggestions or advice on where to start? Potentially two there. One about careers and one about if you've got the job already, but you need to draft the strategy. So tackle that how you will.
All right. So let's start with people that want to actually deliver ESG strategies. So as an organization, where do you start from? Right. I think more often than not, my advice usually is let's start from where you are. All right. Let's understand, what you got as a baseline position, and then understand where you want to go from there, and then probably identify where the gaps are. Okay. What are the key focus areas? Okay. But beyond that, I always like to start with why. Why are you doing it in the first place? Right. And the reason for that is that if you're doing ESG, just for the purpose of responding to PR, pressures, or
the compliance,
or clients, request, and it's not part of an intrinsic desire and recognition of a social purpose. It's going to fall apart very quickly.
Sure. Okay.
It's going to become a burden because it doesn't get properly integrated into the DNA of an organization. So understanding your why and how that, marries with an ESG strategy is really important. So we would probably typically start with something like a vision design workshop, to trash that out, set a very clear ambition, and then we then go on to the gap analysis, materiality assessments, and then the likes of it. For someone who wants to get involved in ESG as a career, again, I'll ask you why.
Yeah.
Why would you want to do it? And it's important, like you mentioned, James, to have the right passion and interest in any career, in order to flourish, in order to thrive, in order to be able to feel significant, and make any sort of reasonable impact or contribution, in the list. And if you're really interested in this, you need to find mentors, that are being where you are. Find people that you can tap on the shoulders, that can give you a bit of a hand holding. All right. So they're mentors, they're coaches, and personally as an individual, you've got to immerse yourself, in the trends, right? What's the history of ESG? What are the policies, the direction of travel? What are the pinch points for organization? What is the problem and challenge we are trying to solve? It might mean going to get a specialist master's degree in one of the related subjects, for example. He might be joining a professional body like IEMA, Institute of Environmental Management and Assessments, or any other related professional bodies in the build sector, and getting yourself immersed, in that subject matter and areas.
Okay.
There are lots of free webinars and seminars you could to upskill your knowledge as well, in many areas.
Yeah, okay, some great advice there. You touched on earlier companies or organizations starting with their why and then building that into the DNA of their business. And I'd like to expand on that a bit more in terms of how have you seen businesses, or what have you seen, hopefully, where businesses have done it well and got that true connection or true integration of ESG and the business's DNA. Put it a different way, where does it go well and where did it not go well?
All right. So that's another good question as well, and going a bit into more detail there as well. I think where it doesn't go well is particularly where it becomes a tick boxing exercise. And you find that the organization is basically trying to respond to compliance requirements as a minimum. So what is the list we can do to make this stuff disappear? I just want to be in the black. I don't want to get in the red.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah, okay.
and it basically takes all the joy out of it, right? It becomes an arduous, strenuous exercise. It becomes burdensome, right? There's a lot of pushback on, lots of great ideas, and innovation, and it's just comes down to a production ground, and it's just makes it lackluster and stuff that people don't engage with, so you like engagement, you like buy-in, and it will end up on the shelf gathering dust till the next season where you need to update the checklist.
Sure.
Okay. So that fails, clearly, and it doesn't do what it needs to do. An example where it is really successful is where, an ESG strategy is fully integrated into a business's operation. So basically, it's there, but it's not there. Right?
Yeah, okay.
Meaning,
just effortless.
It's effortless. It doesn't constitute an additional administrative burden or challenge for project managers, for operation unit leaders, for program managers, for various engineers, consultants, or employees, right? It seamlessly introduces part of the bottom line.
Yeah, okay.
Basically, and in order to do that, it can't just be top down. It's got to have the top down and the bottom up, approach. There's got to be a buy-in. There's got to be an engagement from all relevant stakeholders, which is why you've got to start with the why. You've got to engage all relevant stakeholders. You've got to carry everybody along in that process, right? You've got to identify the things that matter the most to you, not just you as a decision maker, but to the interested parties, right? To the delivery parties, right? To funders, to your entire value chain, as a whole, and then you create a strategy, a vision that actually resonates with everyone. When you got that sense of ownership and buy-in, and it feeds into your organizational philosophy, your ambition, your actual core and DNA, effectively, it becomes who you are.
And there's a lot of team ethos around, bring things together. You work in teams. You don't work in the same place, necessarily. Having said that, the construction sector is a very wide sector, and a lot of the debate I've read in the press and everything always defaults to baseline skills: bricklayers, plumbers, carpenters, whatever. Which are fantastic jobs, and a bricklayer can earn 50,000 a year very easily these days if they're a very good bricklayer. But equally, there's masses of jobs around that we also need to recruit into, whether it be building engineers or whether it be people working in the regulatory side, building control. We've got now new buildings regulator as well. Planning, all those areas. So there's lots of jobs. It's extremely inclusive. And the other thing I'd say, about our sector is that it's the one industry I know of where there's no snobbishness attached to it. If you're good at your job and you work hard, whatever your background, wherever you came from, whatever you want to go, you can go there. Yeah, it's the art of the possible. Yeah, and there are many people who started this industry at 16 years old who are now chief executives, and that's one of the few industries where that applies. So we've got an exciting proposition to do. I'm personally going to be chairing Birmingham Housing Week for 2025, and we'll be holding that in probably in November, and it's all about getting those skilled jobs understood by people, and then connecting them to the right training, and then connecting them to the right employer. And it's as simple as that. So it's that closing the gap between the fact that I talk to young people who say they'd love to get into construction but can't get in, can't find a route in. And I talk to employees who say, we'd love to take on young people, but I can't find any. And there's something in the middle of all that says we have an opportunity to give people a fantastic career and deliver the homes and the other buildings and the infrastructure and things that we need desperately to grow UK PLC. So I'm also personally responsible in 2008 for launching the Get Britain Building campaign. That had a big skills element to that, and it still carries on. And I've also talked about a program called I Built It, which is all about that pride. It's about getting people in and connecting people to the job. So watch this space, but my view is we've got a mayor in Richard Parker for the West Midlands who's very, very keen on housing and skills. He likes buses as well, but I'm better at housing and skills. We, by connecting those things up, we have a real opportunity, particularly for those disadvantaged communities in this area where we've seen youth unemployment at levels which are completely unacceptable, given that we've got the level of opportunity we've got. Opportunity, not threat. Let's get on with it, is my view.
That's great. And certainly something that RPS really focus on that, bringing, whether it be apprentices or graduates, or bringing them into the team early on and just showing them what the industry has to offer. And as you say, it's so wide ranging that there's certainly something for anyone and everyone, I think. I think that's been a really interesting discussion, and I just wanted to sort of wrap up and see if there was anything in particular, just in terms of key takeaways, if there was people who are listening to this, those key takeaways that you want people to take away and really think about.
Yeah, so thank you. So flip back, if I may, to the work we do in the Centre for Future Homes. It's all about providing the data and the insights to allow evidence-based decision making. So I think we've been led too often by misinformation, by people not doing the proper gathering of evidence to make decisions. So we aim to put that right. And in doing so, to avoid unintended consequences. So again, our industry over the years has been littered with unintended consequences. So really important that we avoid those wherever possible. And it's also really important that we embrace the challenges that I mentioned right at the outset of this discussion and deal with them head on, whether that be climate change, whether it be building safety, where we have an absolute responsibility to deliver homes buildings that are safe and that should be given. Clearly the opportunities around skilled employment that we just talked about are fantastic. And if we can connect those things up, we create better places for everybody, and that then impacts, on everything. Crime, everything is related to whether people feel included, whether they feel purposeful, and it's my submission that if they spend a good day working in our industry, they'd be too tired to commit crime. So, but no, seriously, it is a world full of opportunity for us still. The fact is, this industry can lead UK PLC. One of the reasons I started Get Britain Building back in 2008, the big crash, was the multiplier effect of construction. That says for every pound that you invest, you get a £2.84 return, and that's a phenomenal return. And it's because we make the stuff here. We about 80% went into Project 80 and the Keep Mode site were were made in the UK. There's no other industry that can quote those statistics at you. And in fact, on the Keynote site, for instance, the bricks came 6 miles and the blocks came 18 miles. We should be very proud of those statistics, given that we're about to spend Christmas opening presents that almost all will have been made in China.
Any construction project, it's got the opportunity to enhance that local economy, hasn't it? Whether it be everything from local manufacturers all the way down to the cafe that's down the road that's going to have additional people wanting a builder's breakfast. It all adds to that. That investment.
The Building Sustainably podcast is brought to you by RPS. To find out more about RPS and how we can help you deliver future-ready development, visit rpsgroup.com and then search for the Building Sustainably podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you get your podcasts. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at RPS, thanks for listening.